everyone. Welcome to Aldea. My name is Jake. Glad you're here. And I want to start by saying, or at least acknowledging the fact that, as a community of people, we are walking through life together. We are all on our unique spiritual journeys, but we're also on a collective journey. And part of that means facing the ongoing chaos of being a human on this planet and change and just facing all that comes our way together. And so part of that is just acknowledging some of the challenges that people are facing. And in particular, what I want to do just to start is just to speak directly to those of you who are part of our community and who are also part of the LGBTQIA plus community. And maybe you're here and you identify as part of that community, or maybe you are someone who within your family and in your own personal life, you have someone who is part of that community. But we just want to say that here, as this spiritual community, Aldea, we, when it comes to gender, when it comes to sexual identity, we affirm you, that you belong here, that you are seen and celebrated for who you are, that you do exist, and we celebrate you in the full beauty of your identity. And really, in many ways, this is the shift, the holy shift that Aldea was founded upon, that Aldea became Aldea because of the desire to be vocal and clear about our stance of inclusion for the LGBTQIA plus community. So that is just something I want to state as we begin our time together. But yeah, it is January and it already feels like we've gone through quite a bit. I heard someone say recently, it feels like it's like January 45th, And so, we're in this new year, and it already feels like holy shift. And we look at our lives, and sometimes our lives feel like holy shift. But the question of this series is really, what if it's actually a holy shift? And this is what I mean. How many of us, when you think about faith, or you think about spirituality, or you think about life, what comes to mind is not so much a noun, not so much a fixed object, but it's more of a verb. That your spirituality feels more like something imbued with movement and with change. It's about those moments where you thought one way, right? And then all of a sudden you didn't anymore. You evolved. You grew. And while these steps of our journey are all unique to us, right? That we all have our own way of approaching life and we all have our own story. At the same time, we are all part of a larger movement. That there are these stages that all human beings have the opportunity to go through. And it's not about superiority. It's not about saying that, because someone is at a different stage, that makes them better than somebody else. No, in fact, the point of this series is really to look back at all of the stages that you and I have moved through in our journeys and to have an acceptance and an embrace and an understanding, right? Let's talk about something we might call the cringe factor, right? How many of us look back at different points in our lives and we cringe at the way we dressed or the way we did our hair, right? And we do this with our beliefs, our spirituality. We look back at the way we used to approach things and the way we used to think about things, and we cringe, right? But my hope during this series is that we can recognize that everywhere we've been was all a part of it. It was all a part of this journey that we're going on, and it all belongs, and it all built up to the stages that we now occupy. And so this series is called Holy Shift, also because we're really talking about shifting gears. And, I would approach this from the standpoint of, a stick shift car, but I am so fortunate to say that I totally just missed, generationally, I missed the stick shift vehicle. I know. No, I'm not ashamed. There are things, friends, in life, such as vinyl records, that came back You know, they came back in style and they're cool again, and I participated in that. I hope the stick shift never comes back. And, you know, I'm okay with that being in the past. And so let's just talk about it from the standpoint of shifting gears on a bicycle, right? You don't want to move from first gear to fourth gear on a bicycle. That's just not good for the bike, okay? And in the same way, in life, we move step by step. Whether we want to or not, we don't really skip stages on the journey of life. And so my hope is that throughout this series, when you see yourself throughout these different steps and phases and stages, that you can use this as a tool to help you just understand your own journey. For me, I cherish being able to zoom out and see the stages of life that maybe I've occupied and maybe I have yet to occupy, because it both shows me the work I have ahead of me, and I can also celebrate where I've been and what I've worked through. And maybe this overview and this exploration of these stages that we as human beings occupy and we as a world move through, maybe this will help us make sense of some of the things that we have such a hard time making sense of today when we look at our world, when we look at current events, when we look at the chaos and the overwhelm that we are all feeling about all the shifting things in our world, in our society. And so each week of this series, we're going to look at a different dimension of life and how there are ways that we shift, ways that we change, ways that we evolved in each of them. And really, we're going to start on the individual basis and move outward and look at things from a bigger perspective and a collective perspective. But today, friends, we are going to start by looking at the stages of faith that we go through, the different aspects of our spiritual journeys and how we move along these steps. And when we take these frameworks, when we take these overviews each week, the last thing I want to say about it is that these are all maps. These are all tools. And the thing about maps or the thing about tools is that they can only take you so far. A map is not a substitute for an experience of life. So my encouragement to you is to take what is helpful about this and discard what you don't feel that you need. Because friends, the map is not the territory. I discovered, a couple years ago, while living in Washington State, that I was really good at corn mazes. And my strategy was I would get the map for the corn maze and I would just look down and I'd imagine myself as a point on the map, and then I would just, walk along the corn maze without looking up. And I could finish the corn maze really fast, but it wasn't, all that enjoyable of an experience. And I wasn't looking up. I wasn't enjoying what was around me. And I realized I don't want to live life like that. I don't want to live my life glued to the map, right? And so in the same way, my encouragement to you is that this is only a map. But we are going to start today by looking at stages of faith. And in many ways, we're going to be drawing upon this book called Stages of Faith by James W. Fowler. And I hold this book up to you right now to give you the impression that I've read all of it. But you might be out there today and you might be saying, well, I don't know if I even think of myself as being on a faith journey anymore. If that's you, I want to read the subtitle of this book to you. The Psychology of Human Development and the Quest for Meaning. See, friends, whether or not you think of yourself as having a faith, that as we go through today's message and really go throughout this series, we're really talking about faith as a category, as a dimension of life, as the aspect of life that allows us to approach mystery and allows us to approach meaning and really to ask some of those questions. And really this dimension of life that evolves and changes with us as we grow and we move throughout life. And so I want to start by kind of taking us through these stages. And as we do this each week, I know it's kind of feels a little complex, feels a little bit like, whoa, I don't want to have to learn this really complex thing. And so I've distilled it down into the simplest way that we as human beings communicate nowadays, which is the emoji. And we're going to go through these stages using emojis. And I want to start by talking about the first stage of faith that we occupy. And this I represented through the Santa emoji. And this stage of faith is called the intuitive stage. And it's a stage that we occupy generally from ages 3 to 7. And it is called the intuitive stage because at this age and at this stage of faith, we hear a story, right? Or we have an experience. We are told something about faith or spirituality, and we believe it. We take it for what it is. We assume that what we are told is the only truth, or we assume that the experience that we had is the only experience to be had, or it's the only way of looking at things. Now, you might say, yeah, well, that's all good and fine. You're not even 7 years old yet. But we also know that the messages that we get by the time we're 7 years old, that the ways that we are told to understand and think about the world by the time we are 7 years old are pretty darn important, that they have a huge effect even on our biology. Dr. Bruce Lipton, who's a cell biologist, says that by age 7, we're already 95% programmed by the experiences, belief, and behaviors we absorb in our environment. Our subconscious mind becomes the autopilot that runs our lives. So this stage is not so much about a rational, logical knowledge of faith, but it's more about the experience of faith, the stories, the images, the relationships that shape us. Michelle, who you met just a moment ago, used to be the kids director here at Aldea. And, something that she has told me from the beginning is why it was so important for her to be involved in that ministry, and why today we still have such a huge emphasis on our kids ministry, and we're so fortunate to have a wonderful kids director in Mary May. Part of why this is just such an important thing for us is because what is being said to children has a huge effect on their lives. How we understand faith, the images that we're given are massively important. How many of us can look back and say that we were given an image when it came to spirituality or faith? We were given an image or an understanding by the time we were 7 years old that affected us, that had a huge effect on perhaps the rest of our life, or at least a huge part of our journey, right? And so when we come home and we're saying, well, I was told today that Jonah spent 3 days in the belly of a whale, we're not thinking about, is this literal or is this metaphorical, right? Because at this point in our life, we're not thinking about scientific explanations, and we're not comparing this with experiences we've had because we haven't had all that many yet. And so whether it's a child that is occupying the stage, or perhaps maybe there is an adult that that in some way or another occupies this stage, friends, it is not our job to pull someone out of this stage. It is not our job to look at someone who believes something differently than we do and convince them otherwise. It would be like a child coming to you and saying, well, how did Jonah... Someone told me today that I look like I'm dressed like a spiritual rapper. And so I feel like at the very least I had to do some kind of dance. So that's okay. That's okay. Who among us, if a child were to come to us and were to say, how did Joni Mitchell, how did Jonah spend 3 days in the belly of a whale? And you would say back to them, well, scientifically, that doesn't make any sense, right? The stomach acids, Or who, if a child came to you and said, how does Santa Claus visit every house on one night? And you would say back, well, Santa's more of a marketing thing, so... No, that's not our job. That's not our role. And the reality is that we tend to move through this stage by the time we reach elementary school age anyway. And by that point, we have moved into another stage of faith, one that is marked by a more of an attachment to a literal understanding of things, or what we might call the literal stage. And I have the emoji of the Bible because at this stage, what is very important is that idea that truth is found in the book, right? And what we really focus on at this stage is What is real? What is make-believe? Maybe at this stage, a child is proud that they no longer believe in the things they used to believe. And when it comes to religion, well, things are the way they are because the Bible says so. And so this explains what God looks like and acts like and what God wants. It's all found in there at this stage. And now I want to do a little thought experiment, and you're really going to have to use your imagination on this one. But I want us to imagine a society where people use a book written between 2,000 to 3,000 years ago as the justification for some major decisions being made in the world. Just imagine it. I know it's really difficult. It's just a thought experiment. Just try to, put on your creative minds. We've been doing this Intro to Aldea small group over the past couple of weeks. And we've been hearing the stories of different people and their journeys of faith. And I've heard a few stories now about people who already at this stage of life, by the time they were in elementary school, they had already been confronted with this idea that if they didn't buy into all of the trappings of truth as it is explained in the book, then they were out, that they had no other option, right? And so people who I've met and already talked to, they walked away at elementary school age. They already decided, well, this isn't for me, because if it's that I have to buy into a completely black and white understanding, a completely literal understanding, right? Then they've already decided I can't do that. A little side note, the concepts of literal and metaphorical, the breakdown between, well, this is more historical and this is more poetic, that wasn't even a concept back when the Bible was being written. So this idea of literalism and approaching things from a fully literal context is a fairly new understanding, and it's one that we can really get stuck in because, as Phyllis Tickle says, literalism provides a divine authority that can feel like a shield against the complexity and plurality of the modern world. It's a way of saying this is true and I don't have to wrestle with it. Here's the reality, friends. Not everyone wants to wrestle with their faith. Not everyone is in a place to wrestle with their faith. Certainly when we're 10 years old, we're not necessarily equipped to be wrestling with our faith. And so if you have friends and if you have family who are in this stage and they are not able to wrestle with their faith, what do? We don't judge them. We love them, right? And we, just as we love the parts of ourselves that we recognize went through this stage, maybe there's even parts of us that still move through this stage. But the reality is, it might not be that literalism that is holding them back, because there is another stage that we move through. And this stage is not so much centered on the book, but it's centered on the church or the community. And this is a stage called the conventional stage, where the center of gravity is really the tribe, the group, the community. So this is my church, these are my friends, this is my pastor, right? And this is sort of how I understand my journey. Do you notice that these first three stages, all of your spiritual journey is external, right? It's all about these other things. It's about what you were told, it's about what's in the book, it's about the thing that you belong to. Now, I don't want to diminish community in any way, because so much of what we do here is build community and create a place of belonging. But there is something that happens when you trade your ability to question your beliefs for a sense of security within your community. Karen Armstrong says that this stage, the conventional stage, often represents a reliance on external authority and a reluctance to question. It is faith as a badge of belonging. Now, friends, this is a badge that we are evolutionarily wired to seek, right? We need that sense of belonging and that sense of community. And when we take on that badge, and whatever that requires of us, it often provides for us that community. It provides for us that social stability. Maybe if you were someone in my position, it even provided a sense of financial security. And there were certainly dark nights of my own soul where I was questioning my faith, and yet I was so afraid to leave that badge behind because I didn't know if there was anything for me after. I didn't know if there would be a place where I could find community out of those first 3 stages. And so this stage, the conventional stage, tends to follow us from the ages about 12 into early adulthood. And yet, how many of us would be honest and say, yeah, but there are probably a lot of people who stay in this stage forever, right? I'm going to let you in on a little secret. There are pastors of really large churches out there who actually believe a lot more of the same things or don't believe a lot of the same things that we do here, right? There are a lot of pastors that would love to be a part of a community like this, but they cannot give up that badge of belonging. They cannot give up that security. I know people like this. I was a person like this. There are a lot of people who are in churches and they don't necessarily even believe what is being said from the pulpit, right? But they're afraid to lose their friends. And that, friend, is totally understandable. We all could probably relate to this. We don't judge that. We relate. But we also ask ourselves, okay, so what does a person do in that situation? Well, most likely they take their doubts and they kind of put them over in the corner, right? They compartmentalize their questions so they don't really come up too often and they don't threaten that sense of social stability. But I'll let you know something about me, okay? I love doubt. I think doubt is severely underrated, okay? I think doubt has been given a totally bad reputation. We think of it as this totally bad thing. But something changed for me. I remember this moment where I was driving in my car. I think I heard this on a podcast, and it was such a simple phrase. You might have heard it before, but it really changed my perspective in a lot of ways. And it was this: doubt is not the opposite of faith. Certainty is the opposite of faith. Friends, we so often think of doubt as the enemy of faith, but it's not. It's a part of faith. It is a part of the experience of faith. And there's an author, Peter Rollins, who he writes really in depth about how to engage in a faith that actually could include doubt. And really, in many ways, the motto of his work is to believe is human, to doubt is divine. And so if we are able to move through these stages, we might find ourselves past the conventional stage into something new, into a stage actually defined by the questioning, defined by the curiosity. And this is a stage we call the reflective stage. It is a stage of becoming an individual and starting to take personal responsibility for your faith. And maybe not just your faith, taking personal responsibility for other things in your life, for your own healing. How many of us can realize that when we started to question things, it wasn't just spirituality, maybe it had to do with our family and our social groups. That process of becoming your own person sometimes means questioning all that had been taught, all the ways that you had understood things before. And so this is a phase that we might engage around our 20s or 30s, and yet maybe for some, they never enter into this phase because they're afraid to keep their doubts out of that compartment. And yet, for you, if you found yourself in this stage, you probably said something like this to yourself. You probably said, I'm not going to live with a faith that isn't even my own, even if that means having none for a while or forever. And it's not just a rejection of faith. It's not just a rejection of spirituality or belief. No, it's actually just saying, I'm going to be reflective and curious. Or as Parker Palmer says, the journey inward is essential. Stage 4 is about learning to listen to your own voice and trusting that the divine is present in your own life experience. Even in the experience of sometimes walking away, even in the experience of rejecting what you have been taught, you can still see the divine right there in the midst of it. How many of us remember those moments where you might have first started doubting or questioning some things, and it probably felt really scary? And yet if you also really reflected, you might find that it was those moments that led you here today. It was the power of those holy shifts that actually brought you to the place and to the person that you are now. You needed those moments. You needed that freedom that Thomas Merton talks about. He describes it and contrasts it with love. He says, the beginning of love is the will to let those we love be perfectly themselves, the resolution not to twist them to fit our own image. This also applies to our faith. It must be free to grow and evolve. Have you let your faith loose? Have you let it be free to become what it wants to be? Just as someone you love, you let them live their lives, right? And so let's go back to that moment when you first started questioning, right? Maybe you were sitting there. Maybe you were like, okay, I've questioned the unquestionable. And no lightning bolt. Okay, so we're good. And all of a sudden, a faith that was built on fear becomes a faith that is full of freedom. A faith that is free to evolve and grow. One where we can embrace the not knowing. And we can embrace the questions. Maybe at this point you find a term like spiritual but not religious to be helpful, right? Or maybe even terms like agnostic or atheist were helpful to you. But it's a time where we stop seeing ambiguity as a problem and start seeing it as maybe a positive, right? Or at least something that is leading us somewhere. And if this, friends, is a place that you have found yourself in, then you might have, or you might be in, the next stage, a stage that I use the infinity symbol to describe because it is a stage marked by paradox and integration, and it is called the conjunctive stage because it is a stage where things are conjoined and integrated that we normally wouldn't think would be possible. So we can take our doubts and our questions, and we can also look at spiritual practices and aspects maybe of a tradition that we once held dear, and we can find a way to bring them together. At this stage, we might feel more resolved in our spirituality, not because we have all the answers or any answers, but because we've started to open our hearts and our minds. James Fowler, the author of Stages of Faith, says this about the conjunctive stage. Conjunctive faith involves a reworking of the past, reclaiming and redefining symbols and traditions in light of new understanding. It moves beyond the either or to a both and perspective. It is marked by a sense of irony and paradox, a recognition that truth is complex and multifaceted, and that ultimate answers often remain elusive. Stage 5 people know that the symbols, rituals, and myths of their faith traditions are meaningful, but they also recognize their relativity and limits. The strength of this stage lies in its capacity to hold together opposites in tension while staying grounded in the mystery of faith. How many of us began to find joy and meaning and fulfillment when we gave up the need for answers? And when we instead became spacious enough to integrate the knowing and the not knowing, to create a space where they could live together. Or as Richard Rohr says, it's a stage about learning to see with both eyes wide open, one for clarity, one for mystery. It's about transcending the need to categorize everything as right or wrong, sacred or secular. Brian McLaren says that it's a stage that is generous and hospitable. It seeks not to defend itself, but to connect with others, knowing that love, not certainty, is the highest goal. When we describe this stage, it sounds a lot to me like Aldea. And if we're being just honest and reflective and looking at how things play out in our world, a lot of communities have a hard time getting past the church itself being the center of gravity. And part of the reason is that in order to get to the stage that we're currently talking about, the conjunctive stage, all right, I'll give some laser on this side just so we're spreading the love. You have to move through the doubt. You have to move through that uncertainty, right? And that's such a very hard thing to do. It's hard to do as individuals, let alone as an entire community. And so it's rare to experience a community in this stage of integration, holistic understanding of faith. How many people do you know occupy this conjunctive stage? A stage where connection is far more important than defending your belief. Or love is far more important than certainty. This is in many ways why we are doing this campaign, Who is Aldea, that begins with the survey, because we want to understand who in your life, and we want to get you thinking, who in your life occupies the stages of consciousness that they would want to be a part of a community like Aldea? And how can I help them find their way here? But I do have one surprise for you, okay? Though you might think it's not possible, there is another stage beyond this. And this is a stage that is even more open and even more expansive. And I use the emoji of the globe to represent this stage because it is a stage called universalizing faith. And it is a vision of spirituality and a vision of faith, or maybe just a vision of life that is so vast that there is no one that is excluded from this vision. Fowler says that universalizing faith is exceedingly rare. It represents a radical commitment to inclusivity where life is lived for the benefit of others, often in ways that challenge the status quo. Those in stage 6 embody a vision of the world as a unified whole. They are unshaken by particularities and find God in all things. These individuals are often misunderstood or rejected because their vision transcends the conventional boundaries of society and religion. Have you ever been misunderstood or rejected because of your vision of faith? Stage 6 faith is grounded in a lived reality of love and justice, not just as ideals, but as daily practices. Friends, why have we gone on this vast journey through faith? Because this is your journey and it's my journey. It's a journey where each step of the way, we have expanded our hearts to make more space for others, to make more space for the questions, to make more space for the mystery. And as we do that, our capacity for love grows each step of the way. Do you see what's happening here, friends? Now, as a person, as an individual going through these stages, this is amazing. This is wonderful. This is beautiful. But when we begin to see the potential for this happening on the level of a community, of a group of people, it's boundless potential. It's beyond comprehension because we haven't yet begun to fully see this actualized in our world today. This is why, friends, what we do here at Aldea is not about me. It's not about this building. Friends, what I find to be so incredible is that we are one of the few places, I think, on this planet that are occupying those final 2 stages of faith, actually lived out in community. And when I say one of the few places, we are not alone, we are not doing this work alone, and we are not the only ones. But compared to how many communities occupy other stages, it feels incredibly rare. And it's why I just love what we have, and I'm so passionate about keeping it going, and I know you are too. But what did I say before about understanding these stages and about not getting caught up in this superiority mindset, okay? That, because we're at these stages, that somehow makes us better than or makes someone else less than, right, friends? This is not the mindset that I'm trying to instill in us today. You know, I was joking with our intro to Aldea group. Aldea has been called when we've had articles written about us, at one point we were called like an anti-dogmatic community, which I like. I like that term because there is, no dogma here. But then we were also joking with our intro group, you can get dogmatic about anything. You could get dogmatic about being anti-dogma, I could stand up here and I could be like, if you have dogma, get out, you know what I mean? You are not welcome here, That is not the point of what we're doing here. The point, friends, is to recognize that humanity is on a journey, and we as individuals and we as collectives have a role to play. Richard Rohr, once again, universalizing faith is when you realize the circle of love must keep widening until it includes everyone and everything. Friends, universal love might feel far. It might feel distant, especially right now, especially with what we are seeing in our world today. Friends, that is all the more reason to fully embody this stage as much as we can, to live it out here and now, not just as individuals, but as a community, to shine our light. I want to end with a verse from the Bible, which might seem ironic given the content of today's message. It's from Matthew 5, verse 14 through 16. This is Jesus giving the Sermon on the Mount, his most famous sermon, and he's speaking to this fledgling group of people who are awakening to a new consciousness and a new way of being in the world, and he says this: "And you, beloved, are the light of the world. A city built on a hilltop cannot be hidden. Similarly, it would be silly to light a lamp and then hide it under a bowl. When someone lights a lamp, she puts it on a table or a desk or a chair, and the light illumines the entire house. You are like that illuminating light. Let your light shine everywhere you go, that you may illumine creation, so men and women everywhere may see your good actions, may see creation at its fullest." Friends, let your light shine. Friends, embody the fullness of the stages of faith that you have been through. And we do it on behalf of the world, right? And a vision of love that includes all, and no one is excluded.